Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which will discuss the application requirements for the Smart Supervision Grant Program administered by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. My name is Leah Kane, and I am the Deputy Director of the Reentry Program at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, which provides training and technical assistance to grantees funded under the Federal Second Chance Act, including the Smart Supervision grantees. Before we begin, I just have a couple of technical notes. If you encounter connection or audio problems during today's webinar, technical support is available from WebEx at the following phone number, 866-229-3239, and we'll also put that phone number up in the chat box on your screen. Unfortunately, there are some connection problems that may not be able to resolve during the webinar. However, we are recording today's webinar, and everyone who registered for the webinar will receive an email as soon as the recording is available on our website. At the end of today's webinar, we will have a few minutes for questions and answers from the audience. To ask a question, please enter it in the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll answer as many as possible before we end at 3 p.m. today. Our primary speaker today is Julie James, a Senior Policy Advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance in the U.S. Department of Justice. Julie oversees the Smart Supervision Program on behalf of BJ's Policy Office, and we're very grateful to her for finding the time to lead today's webinar. But before I turn it over to Julie, I'd like to share just a little bit of background about the Second Chance Act for those of you that aren't familiar with it. Passed in 2008, the Second Chance Act authorizes a variety of federal grant programs that support states, local governments, tribal entities, and nonprofit organizations in providing evidence-based services intended to reduce recidivism. Second Chance Act grants have been available since 2009 from the Department of Justice, but the Smart Supervision Program, which you might know as formerly as the Smart Probation Program, was first introduced in 2012. Here on the screen is information about our website. We have a whole host of information available about other Second Chance Act programs, links to solicitations. We also regularly send out a monthly newsletter and announcements to the field anytime a new Second Chance Act solicitation comes out. You can subscribe to our newsletter in the corner of our screen, which you see on your screen right here. You won't be able to actually register in the screen that you're looking at right now, but if you go to our website, you'll be able to register there. In fiscal year 2014, nearly $68 million have been appropriated for Second Chance Act grant programs. Those dollars will be distributed between adult and juvenile grant programs and across different solicitations. So it's difficult to predict right now exactly how much will be available for each program. To date, 3 solicitations have been released out of those fiscal year FY14 dollars. Today we'll be talking about the Smart Supervision Program, but there are also solicitations available under the Reentry Program for adult offenders with co-occurring substance abuse and mental health disorders. That solicitation closes on March 18th, and you can find more information about that program at the link on your screen. The Technology Career Training Program for incarcerated adults and juveniles also has a solicitation out right now. That solicitation closes on March 17th. As I said before, if you'd like to receive announcements anytime new solicitations are posted, please sign up for our newsletter at our website. At this point, I will turn it over to Julie.
Thanks so much, Leah, and I just want to thank Leah for her work on the National Reentry Resource Center. Thanks to the Center and to the Council of State Governments for supporting the important work that you all are doing out there in the field. So you can see from your screen that, and most of you will have already accessed the solicitation, but the link is there for your reference. Applications are due on April 7th, 2014, and applicants are limited to states, units of local government, and federally recognized Indian tribal governments. Now, before I dive into the details of the solicitation, I just wanted to hit 3 high points, and I'll come back to them at the end. But those of you who have looked at the solicitations in the past may have noticed a change in the name. Previously, this was Smart Probation, but a change in the appropriations language now allow us to go beyond probation and to bring parole supervision into the program. So parole supervision agencies are now eligible to apply. Second, for those of you who have looked at this in the past, may have noticed a change in the nature of the research partnership. Previously, it was a priority consideration. Now the research partnership is mandatory, as we're learning how beneficial it can be to have an active action research partner as part of this initiative. And the last point before we move on to the next slide is, Leah mentioned this earlier, but successful applicants, I just want to underline this, will receive technical assistance from the National Reentry Resource Center. I think this is a really important point. You're not going to be out there on your own. Lessons learned from prior grantees you'll be able to benefit from that, and they'll assist you with planning and implementation of your project. So moving to the next slide, the broad goal of Smart Supervision is to develop and test innovative strategies and implement evidence-based probation and parole approaches that increase community safety and reduce violent crime by effectively addressing individuals' risk and needs and reducing recidivism. On the next slide are listed the objectives. The first is to improve risk reduction approaches. That's largely with the benefit of the research partner and applying what we know about what works in supervision and correctional intervention. Second is collaboration between a parole or probation agency and related agencies as an individual sort of travels through different intercept points in the criminal justice system. We've received some questions about potential applicants about whether, for example, a pretrial supervision agency is eligible to apply. And unfortunately, that's not the case. The appropriations language is fairly limited to parole and probation supervision. But to the extent that collaborations with other agencies enhance outcomes or approaches to parole or probation, then that is definitely in keeping with one of the objectives here. And finally, the third objective is to take a look at how probation and supervision probation and parole are addressing high-risk, high-needs supervisees in specific. Moving to the next slide, looking at the three objectives, really taking a close look at the Affordable Care Act and how agencies can take advantage of what's being offered, connecting people to what's now newly available through the Affordable Care Act. Then to objectively assess or evaluate the impact of the strategies that come out of Smart Supervision, and that's in partnership with the researcher. And finally, to demonstrate evidence-based practices and principles and how those, the application of those can improve outcomes. Moving to slide 9, looking at the mandatory requirements. I referenced these earlier, and you can look at them in your solicitation. But the one that I just want to outline here is that it's going to be very important to incorporate a research partner that you can work with to assist with data collection and analysis, problem assessment, strategy development, or monitoring and evaluation of performance. And of course, these other elements are mandatory as well, so make sure you address them through attachments or through the narrative as required. Moving forward to approved uses of funds. Again, I'm not going to read these, but just take a look at those, and this is guidance about the areas that are appropriate uses of funds. Moving on to selection criteria. This is how the reviewers will score your application. So it's very important. Selection criteria may be one of the more important parts of the solicitation. The program narrative must address the statement of the problem and all of the bullet points, each one listed in the solicitation. So I would encourage you to look at those closely. Same thing with program design and implementation. That will account for 35% of the total score. And again, there are multiple bullet points under each of these that you'll want to address. Capabilities and competencies of the lead agency and any partner agencies that are involved, as well as, very importantly, your research partner. That will count for 25% of your overall score. Your plan for collecting the data required for the solicitation's performance measures. You're not required to submit any performance measures with this. This is just a description of who and how and when you will be doing this data collection. And finally, the impact or outcomes, evaluation, and sustainment of the project. The budget accounts for 10% of the total score, and I would encourage you, again, to look at pages 11 through 16 of the solicitation for all of the requirements. Moving to slide 12, this goes into detail about the statement of the problem. And we want to look closely at the population that you're targeting. Is it the entire state supervision population? Is it a particular group that you've identified that has specific needs? We want to know who you're targeting. We want to know how your agency is structured. We want to know what your current use of evidence-based strategies, what that looks like, and how this fits into that. And also importantly, what your baseline recidivism rate is and how you've calculated it. And we've here looked at supervision violation rate as the measure of recidivism. That's relevant here. Now, I'm not going to belabor under the statement of the problem. I think you all should just take a close look at that. I'm going to move on to program design and implementation. You should clearly articulate the goals and connect them to the overarching goals of the solicitation. That's the primary. There's just the one. Describe how your activities address the mandatory project components and do that one by one. And then look at the approved uses of funds that you saw on slide 10, and describe specifically which approved uses you will be addressing for your project. On the next slide, we want to make sure that you're using data to support the project design. Describe the roles and responsibilities of the research partner and how the role of the partner is integrated into the SSP strategy. And then indicate the number of people who would be served if the proposal is funded. Moving on to capabilities and competencies. This I would just contrast between, in the statement of the problem, we ask you to describe the organizational or management structure of the agency. This is a little different. It's management structure and staffing of the project, identifying the lead agency and the grant coordinator. We're also looking for you to demonstrate the capability of the implementing agency and the partners to do all what you've proposed through the project. So you're going to want to work closely with the research partner on the application itself. And finally, describe the qualifications of the research partner and the prior experience of the researcher with action research, and especially their work with other similar agencies. On your plan for collecting data, one objective note is that the performance measures as written apply only to probation. Take a look at the measures. They do apply. We're going to revise them, but they'll look very, very similar to parole. So just in this section, what we're looking for is the how and the when and the who are going to be collecting the data that's required for the performance measures. On the next slide, talking through the final component of the selection criterion, and then we have budget after that, excuse me. The impact or outcomes, evaluation, and sustainment. Again, here we're looking for the goals and objectives for program development, implementation, and outcomes. We want to know how you're going to document, monitor, evaluate, and identify the impact of the strategy. We want to know what data and information will be collected and how evaluation and collaborative partnerships will be leveraged to build long-term support and resources for the program. We're asking for you to describe a plan for the evaluation of the project and document a collaborative relationship with an objective third-party evaluator, like a local college or university. And finally, we want to see how this fits in with the other initiatives that you're working on, and how you plan to sustain the program after federal funds have been spent. Now here's the final component of selection criteria, budget. The awards, we expect to make awards of up to $750,000 for a period of 36 months. So your budget should not be in excess of that. We're looking for complete, cost-effective, and allowable budget, and an appropriate percentage of the total grant award should be set aside for the work that the researcher is going to do. We have hoped to, and we hope to continue to have conferences with second chance grantees. We have plans in the works for one this spring. And, you know, as many of you know, the approval process for getting those conferences approved these days is quite difficult, but we're doing our best to do that. And we understand how important and beneficial it can be to attend those convenings and meet with peers and talk about the work that you all are doing, make those connections. So we are asking that you budget for part of your budget be dedicated to the cost of travel and accommodations for 3 people to attend meetings in Washington, D.C., and the details are there and in the solicitation. On the next page, there's no match requirement, but we always have to say if you do propose a voluntary match, it becomes mandatory and subject to audit. There's no, this is not part of the selection criteria, so it's not going to be weighted, favorably or less favorably if you don't have a match either way. And then there are additional attachments that we expect to see on, if you look at pages 14 through 16, including letters of support, and again, a mandatory requirement just going back. We need that support from the agency head, a project timeline, position descriptions, a disclosure of pending applications, and a research and evaluation independence and integrity attachment. And details of those can be found on pages 14 through 16 of the solicitation. Just going back to letters of support for 1 minute, I think that's going to be very important if you have a collaboration that you've proposed, but we also look at letters of support from other agencies as well. If you have any questions, contact information is on the next slide, about the process or about the specific requirements of the solicitation. You should contact for process of submitting. If you're having any issues with grants.gov, the contact information is there. If you have questions about whether your entity is eligible, any questions about what should go in the solicitation, please contact the BJA Justice Information Center, and they'll be able to route your question to the right person. And then also in the solicitation is a list of other helpful resources that just summarize some of the research and approaches that have been found to be evidence-based for probation supervision and parole supervision. In particular, the Urban Institute, the second one there, addresses parole strategies as well. So don't want to just focus on probation here. That is the end of my very detailed, I understand, presentation. But as I just close out, I want to go back to that big picture and the three high-level points that I mentioned at the beginning. The first is, again, this is smart supervision, not just smart probation. So parole supervision agencies are now eligible to apply. That if you haven't already begun looking for a research partner, you don't have an existing relationship with a researcher, take a look around and see what you can find locally. Local colleges and universities are often a good source for partnerships in that way. Also, the American Society of Criminology does have a listing of members of the professional organization that can be sorted by state. And so someone who lives nearby is a good option because they can be on the ground with you frequently. And then finally, just want to go back to the idea that if you are successful in this application, you won't be going it alone. We are very lucky to have the assistance of the Council of State Governments through the National Reentry Resource Center, Leah Kane and her colleagues, to help you with the planning and implementation and the support of the research partnership, and how you can get the outcomes that you hope for and intend. Thanks, and we'll take questions now.
Great, thanks, Julie. Just as a reminder, if you haven't submitted your questions in the Q&A box, you can do that right up until we end today. The sooner you get it in, the more likely I'll see it before we end. So please do submit your questions as soon as you can. Julie, we have a couple of questions that have come in various forms from several people. The first pertains to coming from both county agencies as well as nonprofits that provide services to individuals who are on probation or on parole, but they don't directly oversee them. They aren't in that official parole or probation capacity. Are they eligible for funding? And if not, do you have any advice for them about what they could do to possibly get involved in a smart probation program or a smart supervision program?
Well, I'll just refer folks back to the eligibility requirements of the solicitation, that it's limited to states and units of local government and federally recognized Indian tribal governments. For service providers, you would likely, and I hope, have an existing relationship with an agency that is a unit of local government, perhaps, and so exploring a collaboration in that way is something that I would encourage. But in terms of the legal applicant, it would have to be a unit of local government, I'm guessing, in this case.
Is a parole board eligible to submit an application, or does it need to be a Department of Corrections or other specified agency?
It has to be focused on supervision. So I understand that there are parole boards with supervisory responsibilities, and so if it's related to supervision, then yes. If it's more generally about parole board decision making, then no, that wouldn't fall under the solicitation.
Okay. Is the solicitation limited only to agencies serving adult populations, or juvenile populations eligible as well?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. And do we have the contact information for the person who asked that question?
Yeah, I can send that over to you after the webinar.
Okay, great. And I'm sorry I can't answer that right now. My guess is adults, but I would want to do my due diligence before I said one way or the other.
Okay. We got a question about pretrial supervision, and so I just wanted to ask you to reiterate for folks. It sounds like folks on pretrial supervision are not eligible for this program.
That's right.
Okay.
As the lead agency, I can imagine a program where you have pretrial supervision collaborating or interfacing with probation supervision, but probation and parole really is the main focus of the program. And again, the lead agency would, we'd look for that really to be probation or parole.
Okay. Okay, we've received a few questions about the evaluation components. The first is whether working with a third-party evaluator will increase an applicant's chances of being selected.
Well, so I sort of want to clarify that a little bit. Going back to the mandatory requirements, we are requiring the participation of a research partner, and I think the idea that it's I'm not sure if implicit in the question is the idea that maybe an internal research capacity could do that work. I think the independence of having an outside researcher is really important to be able to work with the agency to look at the evidence-based strategies they have in place, to increase their use of different strategies, to course correct as you go along, and really improve fidelity to the evidence-based model. So, if I'm hearing two questions, which I'm not sure I am, one is, yes, it's important to have a third party do the research, and yes, it will increase your chances, and in fact, it's actually a mandatory requirement this year.
Is there any guidance that you can give folks? You've got a few different questions about the appropriate percentage that they should set aside in their budget for the evaluation. Can you give folks any sense about what might be an appropriate percentage?
Sorry, give me just a moment as I look through some files. So, looking at past grantees with similar award amounts, I'm not going to do the math very quickly, but the amounts have sort of ranged, but it looks like, somewhere in the range of 125 to all the way up to 200,000. I think you just want to make sure that you budget for an appropriate amount for what you're doing, and I'll get more detail on that as well. I thought we had a specific percentage in there, but I guess that may not be the case.
I think last year there was a percentage, and it was around 10%. I'm not sure if I don't think it appears in this year's solicitation, though.
Okay.
In terms of picking a research partner and working with them ahead of time, should an applicant identify their research partner and work with them to assemble an application, or would it make more sense to wait until they've received a grant and then do a competitive RFP process to identify an evaluator?
In the model of action research, I think just the short answer is I think identifying one up front and working on them with an application is the right approach. And there are several reasons for this, but underlying a successful action research model is a good relationship, someone you can trust to work with. And there are a lot of resources out there about what makes NRJ put out some resources recently about what makes a successful research practitioner partnership. So if you have sort of questions about the benefits of that or what you should be looking for, I would refer you to those resources. But yes, I think if you didn't identify a specific partner, that would raise some red flags with reviewers, I would imagine.
Is the focus on the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion and connecting individuals to benefits, is that a mandatory component of programs?
It is not a mandatory component of programs. BJA has incorporated this into a lot of their programs as we all sort of work to improve health outcomes and figure this out, the impact of the ACA. It's absolutely not mandatory, though. It is one of several allowable uses of the fund.
There's a question here. It's framed specifically in the juvenile context, and so I'm going to leave that part out of it because there's a broader question that I think might be helpful to folks, and that's whether or not funds can be used to implement a new risk assessment tool.
as I think about that one, I'm going to just go back to the percentage, and I'd say around 20% is kind of where we've been in the past. So folks should take that into consideration. And now the question about risk assessment. I think one of the allowable uses is to promote the use of evidence-based programs and strategies, that is the cornerstone, the foundation of evidence-based practice. So yes. But I think, sort of looking more broadly at not just the risk assessment, but overall uptake by officers and the skills that officers need to administer and then put into action the risk assessment results is really, to think about it a little bit more broadly maybe than just getting a risk assessment online.
How soon should applicants expect to be informed whether they've been successful?
I will pull up my schedule. If you just give me a minute. So it looks like we would hope to let applicants know by mid to late June or early July.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions about calculating recidivism and setting baseline rates specifically for the purposes of the application. Is it necessary for a baseline recidivism rate to be included in the application?
Yes, but I think you can calculate that in a number of different ways. So I think if your state or your locality doesn't have a sophisticated measure of recidivism that you currently use, you can there is case level data that you can use to look at violations, the violation rate, and we've seen that in several successful applications. So as long as there is some documentation of how you did that, what you used, that's kind of what we're looking for.
And are there any required components? I think you mentioned you're looking for violations as opposed to, say, new arrests or returns to prison. Are there any particular kinds of recidivism rates that you prefer that folks use as baseline recidivism rates in putting together their application?
I think the more the better. So if folks have the information of revocation rate and technical versus new crime, or if you're focusing on a particular population, what their recidivism rate might be or their revocation rate might be. So, I think you could do violations, you could do revocations. Just be specific in the narrative about exactly how you're calculating that.
Okay. Does the grant provide $750,000 per year for each of 3 years, or is it $750,000 divided by 3 years?
It's over 3 years, so 750 divided by 3 years.
Okay.
Not 750 per year.
Is it required that the research entity be a college or university, or is a private entity or a for-profit entity also eligible?
Yes, there aren't restrictions on who the researcher is.
Okay. In terms of picking the target population or a scope for the project, is there a preference for statewide projects or county-wide projects, or are there any prohibitions on targeting a specific subpopulation such as women or homeless individuals?
the program does not have a preference between those. We have a good mix of both actually in our current grantees, and we're interested to see both this year as well.
Okay. I think I'm getting through most of the questions here. We received a couple of questions for individuals who are interested in finding out if there have been any successful applicants in the area around them. I'm going to follow up with the folks who submitted those questions. I can send you over links to access that will show you who the Smart Probation grantees have been in the past, so you can find out that information. So I just wanted to promise to follow up with those folks and share more information with you. We have a question from a police department that is interested in using focused deterrence and will partner with state corrections. Would they be eligible for the program?
Well, that sounds almost like a smart policing initiative, which we also have. So if the police department hasn't looked at that opportunity, then I would encourage you to do that. As long as the focused deterrence is on, probationers or parolees and the State Department of Corrections, actually, yes, I think yes, as long as the target population is probation or parole supervisees.
Okay. We have an attendee who would like to fund an assistant district attorney who would be dedicated to the supervised focused deterrence participants. Is this too far afield from the actual supervision aspect of the grant program, or would that be an appropriate use of funds?
I think I might need a little bit more detail, so if I could follow up with that person, I'd appreciate the opportunity.
I'll send you over their contact information after the webinar.
Okay.
I don't actually know the answer to this question. Is it possible for applicants to read applications that have come in the past or see examples of other successful applicants?
The answer is yes. We would have to go through a process to redact all identifying information, so it's kind of an onerous one that has to go through our Office of General Counsel. So I will, I'm going to have to check on that, because I don't know if it's going to be timely enough for the folks who are applying here.
Okay, I believe that we've gotten through all of the questions. We've received a lot of questions, and I want to thank everybody out there in the audience for participating in today's webinar. If we missed your question, I'm going to be going through these after today's webinar ends. I'll also be sending some questions over to Julie to follow up on. If we didn't get to your question, I'm going to put my email address up in the chat box. You can always send me questions after today's webinar, and if we didn't get it answered, then I will send it over to the right folks at BJA. So I'll put that information up in just a minute. Julie, anything else you want to say before we close out today's webinar?
No, I'm thrilled to be working on this with all of you. We appreciate the work that you do and the thought and the time that you've dedicated to even thinking about being part of this program. And I really look forward to considering your applications. Thanks so much for your interest.
Great. Well, I'd like to especially thank Julie James for leading today's webinar. I'd also like to thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for supporting this webinar and the National Reentry Resource Center. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today. After you leave today's webinar, a follow-up survey will appear on your screen. We would greatly appreciate any feedback you can provide. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon.